It's the Resistance Report for February 24th, 2017. Good evening. Today at the Conservative Political Action Conference, Donald Trump once again lied in a big-time way, in a way that undermines our democracy. He said once again that our win was a victory like nobody has seen. Well, that's not technically a lie because nobody's seen that victory, but that's not what he meant. In fact, as you know, it was not a huge victory. It was not really much of a victory at all. He took, in terms of the Electoral College, and you ought to have this because truth is important, and it's important that you have the truth and be able to repeat the truth. He took 56.88% of the available Electoral College votes. That is not impressive. That ranks somewhere between the lowest 1/4 and the lowest 1/5 of all electoral victories in history. I'll repeat that. That ranks somewhere between the lowest 1/4 and the lowest 1/5 of all Electoral College victories in history. And of course, he lost the popular vote by a resounding record, almost 3 million votes. Donald Trump was not the recipient of a win or a victory like nobody has seen before, in the sense that it was large. It was barely a victory at all. And half of America did not even vote. And there continue to be question marks surrounding the legitimacy of that election to begin with. As we've talked about, the CIA and FBI and the National Security Administration have concluded that Russian operatives interfered in the election on Trump's behalf, and we know from the ranking Democrat on the Intelligence Committee of the Senate that Russian interference actually won the election for Donald Trump. Now, today he also delivered a scathing attack on the news media, denouncing news organizations in ways he has before. Dishonest, purveyors of fake news. You remember last week he said that the news organizations of America are enemies of the American people. That's the way he put it. Today he was almost as fierce. He mocked journalists for claiming free speech rights. And then something happened that has never before happened, at least in my memory. Maybe some of you are older than I am and you remember this happening, and perhaps some of you are old enough to remember it happening under Mussolini or Franco or Stalin. Or maybe some of you are from authoritarian regimes around the world, and you understand how this operates. But what Donald Trump then did is, and the White House did, is to bar journalists from the New York Times and CNN and a few other news organizations that Trump dislikes because he dislikes their criticism. He dislikes the fact that they are holding him accountable for his lies. They have corrected his lies vociferously. Donald Trump doesn't like that, so they were barred from a White House press briefing with Sean Spicer. Why is this important? It's important because when the White House begins to select the news organizations that it is going to deal with in press briefings, that means that Americans have less and less opportunity to get the truth. The news organizations that were allowed into the briefing include Breitbart News. Now, Breitbart News, as you know, is the alt-right purveyor of a great deal of hate in the United States, including statements, articles, lies that have distorted dramatically public understanding of what's going on in America and elsewhere. They also allowed in One American News Network. If you haven't heard of that, that's because you probably have not yet tuned in. The One American News Network is another right-wing outlet. And they allowed in the Washington Times. The Washington Times, unlike the Washington Post, is also right-wing. Guaranteed right-wing. Now, when the White House, which is not Donald Trump's only ownership, doesn't belong to Donald Trump, it belongs to the American people. His presidency is not part of Donald Trump's own ownership or campaign. His presidency belongs to the American people in the sense that he is a public servant to all of us. We have a right to know what's going on and to know the truth. And for a president to act like a third-rate dictator and to tell big lies over and over and over again, even though he knows they're lies, because he has been confronted with the truth about whether he had a landslide victory and whether there was massive voting fraud, which is something else that he keeps saying. For him to overlook all of that evidence that he is actually promoting lies, wittingly, knowingly, again and again, and then banning news organizations that hold him accountable for those lies, then we are in trouble. Because this creeping tyranny knows no bounds. Reporters for Time magazine and the Associated Press, they were allowed in, but they decided not to join the Breitbart News and the One American News Network and Washington Times. They felt, the Associated Press and Time magazine, that the White House was being so irresponsible and so dangerous in allowing in only those organizations it approved of, that Time magazine, to its credit, and the Associated Press, to its credit, boycotted the event. I'm sorry to say that ABC and CBS did not. The Wall Street Journal did go to the event. That's not surprising, along with Fox News. Those are both under the aegis of Rupert Murdoch, a friend of Donald Trump. You've heard, no doubt, what's happening in the Wall Street Journal. A lot of people in the newsroom have been very nervous. They had a meeting with the editor of the Wall Street Journal, the executive editor, complaining about slanted news, that they could not investigate what they wanted to investigate about Donald Trump. The Wall Street Journal used to be one of the finest newspapers in this country, and its reporting, not its editorial page, but its reporting was among the best. But now, under Rupert Murdoch and the indirect influence of Donald Trump, reporters are finding themselves constrained. And what did the executive editor of the Wall Street Journal tell them? He said, if you don't like it, leave. Fox News, we all know about. Sean Hannity single-handedly had an infomercial going almost every night in prime time for Donald Trump, allowed Donald Trump to speak, never challenged Donald Trump. In some respects, if Russian operatives helped elect Donald Trump, Sean Hannity had a hand in it as well. So here we have a major assault on the truth. Here we have creeping tyranny. Here we have a president who doesn't consider himself a president of all of us. He considers himself the head of a faction, of a movement, of an alt-right movement, perhaps, of a movement that is ostensibly, in his view, representing American workers. It is not. There is nothing that he, Donald Trump, has recommended or is likely to recommend that is going to in any way help average working people. In fact, he wants to repeal the Affordable Care Act. He wants to get rid of the Dodd-Frank regulatory act which regulates Wall Street. He's filled his entire administration with billionaires and Wall Street bankers. There's no way they are going to look out for the average working American. And he and the Republicans are contemplating a giant corporate tax cut. Meanwhile, he and several Republicans in Congress are already thinking about ways to turn Medicaid into a state block grant, Medicare into vouchers, and to undermine Social Security. This doesn't help working people, I assure you. It's all a sham. It is a bait and switch. This authoritarian populism of Donald Trump is one of the most dangerous things to happen to the United States. The only way to fight authoritarianism is for every one of us who believes in freedom and democracy to join together. And that's why I am disappointed in ABC and CBS. Why did they decide not to boycott that news briefing today? Why didn't they stick with CNN and the New York Times and the Associated Press and Time Magazine and say, if you're not going to allow some of us in, none of us are going to go in? Our democracy is strong, but it is not that strong. It has some potential fragility. I've been reading this book by Sinclair Lewis called It Can't Happen Here. He wrote this in the 1930s as fascism began to threaten the world. It still makes a good read. Let me take your questions. First question is from Gene Lee. Why aren't the President Bush's, Mitt Romney, Jeb, Laura, and other more reasonable prominent figureheads of the GOP speaking out against number 45? Gene, I don't know. That's a very good question. It seems to me it is their public responsibility as citizens of the United States, as people who have had power and exercised public responsibility. They have a duty to speak out against this tyranny. And if they don't, let me put it this way, anybody who fails to speak out when they have an audience, when they have the power to speak out, is indirectly collaborating with this tyranny. Debbie Cars, is it true that the Attorney General of New York, Eric Schneiderman, can start an independent investigation because the phone calls to Russia took place in New York? And if so, what can we do to ensure that it happens? Debbie, technically, the New York Attorney General could do that. Not only were the calls made, apparently, from New York, but as the representative of New York State, he could contend, in terms of standing in court, he could say that he has a responsibility to all of the citizens of New York to maintain the credibility and also the honesty of our electoral process, making sure that New York's electoral votes were fairly counted and New York's votes, in terms of popular votes, were appropriately counted. So yes, he does have that authority. How can you make it happen? You can simply suggest it to him. He is a very independent Attorney General. I think he might be quite interested in your suggestion. Patrice Kaufman, you ask, what are the chances of Jeff Sessions recusing himself so the Justice Department can investigate the Trump-Russia connection? Patrice, I think the chances of that happening are about the same as the chances of me playing center for the New York Knicks. I think it's very unlikely. But I do think that it is important that he do so. That is, Jeff Sessions, as you know, was the most loyal participant in the Trump campaign. Of all senators, he was the first senator on board. He is a Trump partisan from day one, and yet he officially, as Attorney General, now supervises the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI. So how can the FBI be expected to do an independent and thorough examination, even if we could trust Comey, if Jeff Sessions is involved? So, yes, he should recuse himself. Nicole Wallen, can Trump legally force the director of the FBI to resign if his ongoing investigations into Trump and his administration turn up something illegal? Well, Nicole, here again we get into some of the intricacies and delicacies of public service and public responsibility. You may recall, if you are old enough, that Richard Nixon fired Archibald Cox as special prosecutor investigating Richard Nixon's potential unconstitutional intrusions in the election of 1972. That caused a firestorm when he did that, but he did it anyway. Elliot Richardson, when he did that, who was Attorney General, resigned. It didn't help Richard Nixon. But you see, here's the thing that you ought to remember about our system. If you are president or you have power in this system, you are not going to be stopped unless others with power in the system stop you. And that means that you, as citizens, you as a citizen, others who are watching me tonight, we all have an obligation to make sure that those who are representing us, not just in blue states, but also in red states, senators in red states, representatives in red districts, have just as much responsibility to all of us as Americans as does anybody else. And we've got to give them backbone. We've got to make sure that they understand the threat to freedom and democracy that this represents. Kevin Durand, can we count on human nature to insulate humanity from brutality and inhumane treatment under this malevolent authority? Kevin, a complicated, abstract question, but let me just say this. The only thing we can really count on is the decency and goodness and patriotism of the American public. Now, when I use the term patriotism, I'm not using it in the sense that it's been used by Donald Trump. I don't mean chauvinism or nativism or xenophobia. It's not a matter of we are better than them or excluding other people. I'm using patriotism in a much more fundamental and I think important way. That is love of country. Responsibility we have to one another as members of the same society. Responsibility we have to maintain the Constitution of the United States. Responsibility we have to assure that our representatives, including the President of the United States, responds to us, adheres to democratic values, and respects the Constitution. That is on all of us. It's not just on him. That's why activism, citizen activism at this point in time, and presumably continuing onward next week and the week after and months after, is so critically important. John Reese, would Congress have recourse against Sessions if he knows of a crime but ignores it? John Reese, Congress presumably could move to impeach any elected official or any appointed official if Congress believes that they have acted illegally, misdemeanors and high crimes. Knowing of a major crime, but ignoring it if you are an attorney general, that goes beyond mere prosecutorial discretion, because obviously attorneys general do have some discretion in terms of what crimes they pursue, but actually ignoring a major crime, such as you are getting at, that would be grounds for impeachment of the attorney general as well. Rebecca Oliver, if all the press boycotted Trump's press conferences, then only alt-right press would have access. Isn't that more hazardous? No, Rebecca, it seems to me that if all of the major press outlets decided not to go to any press conferences, it would delegitimize those press conferences. People would come to understand that those press conferences really had no justification. In fact, by lacking any of the normal press, mainstream press, the press that we all trust and rely on, even if we don't trust and rely on every single one of them 100% of the time, that would undermine the justification and legitimacy for those press conferences. I mean, who cares if just the alt-right comes to talk to Donald Trump and to Sean Spicer? That's what's happening already anyway. We must make sure that Donald Trump does not become the arbiter of authority and truth. That's the authoritarian way. Let me just make sure we're all on the same page about this, because it's important. What authoritarians do, and I'm talking about tyrants, dictators, people who don't believe in democracy but have the power, what they do is they try to eliminate all sources of independent facts and truth and judgment and analysis, so the public only has to rely on the dictator or the authoritarian. That is the technique of authoritarianism. That's what Donald Trump, unfortunately, seems to be on the way to doing with his rallies and his tweets and his press conferences by invitation only and his criticisms of the press, calling them, the press, the enemy of the people. That kind of language, that kind of approach, that strategy is an authoritarian strategy. It has been used again and again and again by those who want to shut off independent inquiry and all critical opinion and judgment. Alan Moriera. Could Trump be impeached for First Amendment violations regarding recent barring of CNN and so on? Why isn't there immediate court action on this? Alan, again, theoretically, a president has an obligation to uphold and respect the independence of the press. It's right there in the Constitution, in Article 1. The First Amendment, actually, it's not only Article 1, it's in the First Amendment in terms of freedom of the press. I have this handy all the time. I hope you have yours, because it's coming into focus more and more. But in order to have an article of impeachment or articles of impeachment, and by the way, he could clearly be impeached right now under the Emoluments Clause, Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution, which prohibits any public official from taking gifts or money or any emoluments from any foreign government. But that is what Donald Trump is doing every day at, for example, the Trump International Hotel and all his business dealings around the world. But it's not enough, in theory, to commit an impeachable offense. You've got to have the political will in Congress to actually impeach him. Carla Cowan, can't Twitter cut off number 45 and close his account? Carla, Twitter has done that with regard to people who are spouting hate. It did it with regard to Milos Yiannopoulos, but it would be very hard to do that with a president of the United States. Terry Buiso, I believe it is. What is it going to take for the GOP to step up and do the right thing? I'm worried it might never happen. Terry, I would be kidding you if I said I wasn't worried as well, but I know members of the Republican Party. I don't know them well. I have a few very good friends who are former senators, Republican senators. I have found many of these people to be extremely concerned about America, some of them concerned about Donald Trump. Many of them tell me that privately they talk to other Republicans who are deeply worried about Trump's behavior, his stability emotionally, and what he's doing to undermine democratic institutions such as the free press. The question is whether they have the guts and courage to come out and say so. And I think in coming weeks we'll know. Christine Watson, I feel as though my hands are tied. I've called, emailed, mailed to everyone I can think of, and demonstrated I've done everything I think. What else can I do? Christine, do everything you are doing, but do it with other people. I hope you're joining together with others. This is something that I've emphasized here. IndivisibleGuide.com is one of several organizations that are providing guidance as to how you can work with others and find others and hold your members of Congress responsible. If you try to do it all alone, you can get somewhere, but by joining together and creating an organization and mobilizing other people, you actually become a political activist organizer, and that is a much more powerful position. And this is our final question of the evening. It comes from Brian Lewis. Brian, you say, I'm truly frightened. Will we be able to undo all this? Brian, I'm sure we will. I say I'm sure because I have ultimate faith in the decency and goodness of the American people and also of our institutions of government. I've spent almost 50 years, I hate even to say that, but almost 50 years in and out of the United States government. I have the deepest respect for people who are in government, particularly civil servants, who are very often unsung heroes, State Department, high-level people who are there now, laboring away under very, very difficult circumstances, people at the EPA who are being muzzled and gagged, but they are still working. Many members of Congress, even Republicans, as I said a moment ago, who are working hard and who care about the country. And they're members of the judiciary, judges, who are deeply concerned about this country and will, in almost every case, certainly strive to do the right thing. They are good people, most of them, very dedicated people. And so we have a bulwark against tyranny. We also have an independent press, even though Donald Trump would like to squelch all criticism. We also have state attorneys general and state governments, and we have good people in a lot of these states and a lot of these attorney general positions who will use litigation and who will protect as many of us as possible from this kind of tyranny. So the system has a lot of checks and balances and safety valves in it, but it is being tested now as never before, at least in my lifetime and in my memory. Donald Trump, to my view, way of thinking, is a menace, a danger, a clear and present danger to our democratic society. People often say to me, well, what about Michael Pence? If we get rid of Donald Trump, if he's impeached, or under the 25th Amendment, for some reason, he's found to be incompetent to serve, or if he dies in office because of a coronary heart attack, God forbid, I don't wish that on anybody, by the way. But what happens if Michael Pence becomes president, they say? Wouldn't that be bad? Well, I would find Michael Pence to be a difficult president to deal with. Certainly his values and his judgment and his goals are contrary to mine and to most people who are now watching right now. But at least he's sane. At least he presumably cares about democratic institutions. At least he wants a government of the people, by the people, for the people. Unlike Donald Trump, whose narcissism and megalomania is so huge that he seems to take every press criticism as a personal criticism of him himself, and he cannot stand it. And he wants to make himself a king or a despot or dictator or whatever you want to call it. That I find much more dangerous. Now, finally, I can understand many of you who are fearful and despairing Many of you who feel helpless and powerless. I understand that. And that's why I say to you night after night that the best response to your feelings of helplessness and powerlessness and despondency, the best response is for you to become even more politically active. Not just calling the White House, not just calling your members of Congress, not just demonstrating, but also organizing and mobilizing and energizing, getting ready for the midterm elections, getting ready for the primaries for the midterm elections, which already are underway, getting ready to take back the House and the Senate if at all possible, getting ready to exercise your rights under our democracy to the extent that we have it left, and we still do, making sure that your children and grandchildren have the legacy that we had in terms of democratic institutions that are stronger even than we have, that are more enduring, that will not succumb ever again to a kind of Donald Trump. It's up to you. It's up to me. It's up to all of us. It's our responsibility. That ends the resistance report tonight. I hope you have a good weekend. I'm going to take a few days off. I will see you at some point next week.